there's been times where I've been gaslighted so much where I've been like, I've called people out on their behavior because I'm at the point in my career, my life, everything that if I'm going to call you out on it. If I think you're bullying or you're doing something inappropriate or I feel a certain way, I'm going to tell you. And then they'll turn it around on me and be like, I can't believe that you think that I would ever do that. Or, the gaslighting starts. And then I'll go home and I'll be like, I'll call my mom and I'll be like, am I being crazy? Like, am I? And she's like, oh no, now that I work with nurses, I know you're not being crazy. And I'm like, finally, it only took 20 years of my career for you to actually believe me or to like, maybe you were lying before, but yeah.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this episode of First Case, we are going to be speaking with Andrea Dyer, Training Manager, and Sarah Griffin, Perioperative Clinical Coordinator for the Satellite Operating Rooms at Boston Children's Hospital. And Melanie, you connected with these two regarding the topic of bullying, which we have discussed before, but I know Andrea speaks on this topic in many different settings, including, I think we're going to learn globally, and just calling more attention, I think, on yet another episode of First Case on this topic is very wise, and we're going to get some practical things that facilities can do to improve their culture today.
Yeah, I'm excited. Actually, this connection with Andrea and Sarah speaks to the power of the nursing network and LinkedIn, because as I was putting this season together and thinking about the ways we can talk about communication and unpack how we communicate in different experiences and different things that we experience in the operating room, I thought, bullying is a huge topic and we need to talk about it. And how do we speak up for ourselves? How do we address the issue? How do we talk about it? So I reached out to LinkedIn and I said, hey, who's the expert on bullying? Who can I talk to that can address this issue in the OR? And someone connected me to Andrea and Sarah, and they were definitely the right choice for the interview. And I am really excited just to get to talk to them and hear about the solutions that they have and the ways that we can make our work environment better.
All right, don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back with Andrea and Sarah.
I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Speaking with Andrea Dyer, Training Manager, and Sarah Griffin, Perioperative Clinical Coordinator for the Satellite Operating Rooms at Boston Children's Hospital today. And we're going to be discussing bullying. And this is actually going to be our second episode. One of our very first was also on the topic. And this is one that just cannot be discussed enough. And so, Andrea and Sarah, thanks so much for coming on the show to continue this important discussion.
Thanks for having us.
So I feel like we're going to get some really good stories today, but before we dive into the bullying stories, I would just like to hear the story of each of you and your careers and how you find yourself where you are today.
Well, Justin, I think it all started. I grew up in an Italian family from the Northeast. So it started kind of with my culture. And ever since I was a child, my mother had been drilling it in my head, and I can't even make this up. Every single week of my life, she was telling us from off the chopping block to never be jealous of people, to be happy for people. So I was kind of born confident. Like, it was the culture, my upbringing, the way that life was, my father as well, very strong influences in my life. So it wasn't until I began my career when I was in the operating room. It was the first time I was ever really bullied. So it was a shock to me. Like, I went in my whole life being confident, happy. All my life I defended people who were being bullied at school, and I was short. I don't know why anyone listened to me. I guess I had a powerful voice. Like, it always amazes me. She said that I would stand up for people on the school bus, but I'm like, well, thanks, Mom. You kind of sent me out there, like, guns a-blazing with nothing. But so then when I went to the operating room and I was a new Periop 101, it was the first time in my, like, career and life that I had experienced, like, true bullying and, like, sabotage in my first job. And it was devastating to me. It was so upsetting. There was 3 of us in our cohort. And, like, even to the point where, like, I was in fight or flight so much that, like, my hair started falling out. Like, my counterpart started to need medications for this, to, like, deal with this. And this was insane to me. So it was kind of in that moment that I was like, I had an aha moment. And being in my 20s, I was like, I'm going to go back, I'm going to get my master's, and I'm going to come here, and I'm going to fire all the bullies. Like, that was my mindset. And I was like, you know, I've grown up since then. So now it's like, I'm more mature about it. And I was like, what can I do to change the practice, the operating room, everything? And that was education.
Yeah. To truly fix bullying behavior, you don't fire them and send them somewhere else, right? You have to create awareness to the behavior. And I know we'll dive into this in a minute. And Sarah, what about you? What's your background? And I really love, Andrea, how you succinctly tied your career growth to this very topic. That was well done. No pressure, Sarah. I'm just saying.
I was thinking the same thing, Justin, but here goes.
She's just as big as a powerhouse as I am.
So I am from a family of nurses, so a nursing career was, you know, in the cards for me. I'm a caregiver at heart. I have this caring personality that, you know, I care about everyone. I have this big empathetic personality. So going into nursing, I also knew that the operating room was the place for me. And I remember back when I was in nursing school, I had an aunt who was an OR nurse, and she said, you know, got to have thick skin to go into the operating room. Got to have that. So be prepared when you go in there. And so that was my baseline, my mindset of I need to be prepared for this. And this is what I'm going to experience. And I'm just going to have to accept it. So I, right from nursing school, went into the operating room, and I spent many years dealing with difficult situations and bullying and just thinking that that's just the way it was. I got to a point where I was about, like a lot of nurses, I was about ready to leave the profession. I started thinking about other careers where it was a more professional environment where people treated each other better. And I didn't have to have that thick skin to just show up to work. And I decided to give leadership a try and see if I could be the catalyst to change. Instead of being the person who deals with it, let's be the catalyst to change it. And with nurse retention as it is right now, it's important for us to keep them in the profession. So it was my goal to change that mindset. And I really believe that we need to change the way the operating room goes, and not to come in with that thick skin right off the bat. We need to make it a place where it's professional and we have, you know, good teamwork and interactions among each other all the time. So from my perspective, going into leadership and being that catalyst for change has actually grown my passion for nursing even more and really made me want to stay and make a difference.
But what Sarah Griffin doesn't mention is that she was a nurse for 20 years, consistently being bullied in the OR. So that's where her passion was driven from. Until she came here at Boston Children's, it's the first time she felt like a family and like we could make a change with her healthy work environment that she does.
Yep.
I never thought about that grooming before that is done even before you get there. That really says a lot about how we perpetuate the issue.
Oh, it absolutely does. Every time I put something out on social media that says, hey, if you could give nurses wanting to work in the operating room, if you could give them any bit of advice, one thing that you would tell them, 9 times out of 10, the first thing that comes out of people's mouths is grow a thick skin. Don't ever let anybody see you cry. And always make sure that you Don't take anything personally, because a lot of times it's not directed at you, but even if it is, it doesn't matter. So just make sure you have thick skin. And that should not be the first thing that we are telling people about the operating room, because the operating room is a freaking awesome place to work, but nobody knows that, because all they hear is you better be prepared to get chewed up and spit out, because that's what's going to happen. And I know that this season and this episode is all about communication, and we're tying in bullying and how we communicate and maybe even stand up for ourselves when it comes to dealing with bullying. But I'm curious if either one of y'all has a particular story you'd be interested in sharing, like a specific experience that you endured that you want to share with the audience.
I think one of my biggest aha moments, I was working in New York City and I was a travel nurse, and the surgeon was bullying one of the nurses. English was her second language, but she was working extremely hard. And he was that role model for the fellows, the residents in the room. So I just was like, I had an epiphany, and I was like, this is it. This is my moment. I texted my mother and I said, Ma, I'm going to get fired. And she was like, it's okay. Your father and I will come get you. We'll make you a sandwich. I was like, all right, here goes nothing. And I just said, you know what? You're being really catty, and I'm going to go get that nurse for you. I said, and we're going to say this to her face, because she's working really hard for you and you're not helping her. And then there was just crickets in the room. And I was like, okay. So then later I saw him in the hallway, and I was like, that wasn't good enough for me. That wasn't my epiphany. So I said it again to him. I said, I felt like you were being really catty and, talking about that nurse, and nothing. But he never bullied around me ever again. And he was like known for bullying. Like later years down the line, he went to anger management. That was a big moment for me.
For me, there's one really big situation that stands out for me. There was a nurse I worked with who, she was a known bully. And again, being groomed from the start that you just kind of put up with it and do your best to have your thick skin and move on. I put up with it for a while. And at one point she was reporting me for taking extra breaks. That was not the case. It was, someone was writing their name because they were in the room and accounting for their attendance in the room, but it appeared that I was taking extra breaks, and just finding any way she could to try and make me look bad. There was one point she went to the manager and she said, I got a phone call over the weekend, and she reiterated a story back of a situation where she had actually physically pushed me in the operating room, and I had gone to management the day before. And she reiterated that and said that the person said that to them, and that there was a threat involved in this phone call over the weekend. And the manager then, very innocently, it was not her fault, brought it to the whole operating room and basically told everyone, whoever made this phone call, you'll hear from HR. And everyone in the room knew that whole situation that had happened. So it made it look like I made that phone call. And it was something where, in the grand scheme of things, everyone knew she was the bully. So they believed that, of course, I didn't do that. But these are little things, just the little aggressive ways, the manipulative ways that they pull other people in. And it was devastating. And that continued for a couple years until she was finally let go.
Wow. That's hard to deal with. And to know coming into work every single day that you are going to have to wonder what you might experience, what you might be exposed to, or what any type of things going on in your environment. And even sometimes bullying can even take on the form of sabotage too. Like you're getting set up for your case. I know in my own personal experience, I have a great, very early memory being new to the OR. I was very fresh off of orientation and I'm doing a knee scope. I mean, knee scopes are pretty basic, pretty simple. The particular surgeon was known more for his frat boy OR than he really was for anything else. So it was just a lot of guys working in there, a lot of that. And I love ortho. So I'm not going to say that I can't really make fun of orthopedics, but sometimes the frat boy stuff gets a little too thick and they have a lot of fun together and fine. But I asked a scrub tech that works with him all the time, like, do I have everything that I need? Is this all ready to go? Because that surgeon had a very quick fuse and you needed to be ready to go 5 minutes before he wanted something or you were going to hear about it. And so I was nervous, obviously. And then the scrub tech looked around the room, was like, oh yeah, you're good. You're great. Well, no, I wasn't. Like, I had completely forgotten to bring suction into the room. You can't do a knee scope without suction. I'd completely forgotten it. And he looked over all my stuff, told me that I was fine. And it could have been, that he just didn't notice that it wasn't there. But then when you're running out frantically to go get it later and the giggling and laughing about the fact that it wasn't there, you're like, did you set me up or did I, you overlook it too? I don't know. But still, those things that we experience where we get sabotaged or we get openly injured or made fun of make it very challenging sometimes to want to come to work every day. But that's my own personal story aside, because I understand. I've been there. But I want to break it down actually to like, what is it? If we're going to define bullying, we're going to define sabotage or the other ways that we experience this in the operating room, what are we talking about so that we can all be on the same page with the terminology?
I think one of the biggest things with bullying that people forget about is just your physical gestures are huge. Like if I'm teaching you, Melanie, and we're in the OR and then you want to look at me and ask me a question and then I roll my eyes to everyone in the room, that is, I would call that maybe a microaggression and that's bullying. So now what are you going to do, Melanie? You're not going to, I've humiliated you.
I'm not going to ask you another question. Nope.
You're not. And then it's like, so now you don't have the critical thinking skills that you should have. And then now you're going to be making those decisions on your own. And that's where I put it back onto patient safety. So patient safety always comes first. And bullying affects patient safety.
Right.
Yeah, and confidence levels. I mean, you can't do your best job if you're not confident that you will, or that you have the tools and resources, or that you're on a team that's going to support you. I mean, that's a really big deal. You use the term microaggression. I'd like to expand that a little bit more. I definitely understand it from, that nonverbal example that you gave. And, another term that I became only familiar with maybe 3 or 4 years ago was gaslighting. And now I feel like this is one that I'm very, very familiar with. And I think regular, culture, most people mainstream kind of have heard that term at this point. I think it did get kind of popularized, and there may be people out there that don't understand it, but I kind of want to put it in this context and have you explain both. Is gaslighting a form of microaggression, or are they two different things?
I always put them in separate categories, Justin.
If it was me, I agree. They're two separate categories. I feel like the microaggressions are a little more of the physical that Andrea just talked about, the in a room and making the huffing and the sighing or putting something down loudly on purpose or pulling a Mayo stand away from someone. Those are, your microaggressions versus your gaslighting is that purposefully turning something around on someone. So you're saying, this is how I'm feeling. And they are taking those words and turning it around on you and making it seem like your feelings are invalid.
And that you're crazy.
And that you're
right?
crazy.
Like you're crazy to even think that that's an issue, right? And really invalidating, how you're feeling and experiencing the situation. Because if you really are on a team, there's, at least two different perspectives and two different, viewpoints on especially a conflict. I feel like gaslighting comes up in conflict, whereas microaggression may not be conflict related. It just may be an attitude about the room or how people are doing things. Would you agree with that clarification?
Yeah. And there's been times where I've been gaslighted so much where I've been I've called people out on their behavior because I'm at the point in my career, my life, everything that if I'm going to call you out on it, if I think you're bullying or you're doing something inappropriate or I feel a certain way, I'm going to tell you. And then they'll turn it around on me and be like, I can't believe that you think that I would ever do that. Or, the gaslighting starts. And then I'll go home and I'll be like, I'll call my mom and I'll be like, am I being crazy? Am I? And she's like, oh no, now that I work with nurses, I know you're not being crazy. And I'm like, finally, it only took 20 years of my career for you to actually believe me or to maybe you were lying before, but yeah. And it's hard because you think you're crazy. And I've come to Sarah Griffin before about things and been like, am I being crazy? But it spills over into real life. And that's what's so hard and awful about it.
I do think that's part of, the definition of bullying is that gaslighting part of it is that intimidation, or that putting fear into someone to question what they're doing or how they're doing it. And it affects them in patient care. It affects their confidence. It affects their critical thinking skills, and really detrimental to their...
And it's costly, like, not to mention how much it costs.
It's inefficient. Yeah, it's inefficient. It's the walking on eggshells atmosphere that gets created by that, and everybody's tentative, and that in itself creates apprehension and means that we move slower and more pensive, and instead of acting with intention, which is so critical, obviously. And you know, talk about turnover times. You're not going to have good turnover times if you're afraid to make your next move. That's a real problem. I wanted to ask you your thoughts on the psychology of the bully, because, you know, I think sometimes, like, the gaslighting piece is just about deflection, right? And if you turn it around, then there's ego protection and ego integrity. But even more on the microaggression side of it, like, what's the mentality there that behavior is somehow justified? The huffing, the slamming of the tray, like all of that. What's going on that somehow, not just the grooming, I get the grooming part of it, so it's been role modeled to some extent and normalized, but there's still the psychology that says this is okay or this is justified in some way.
Honestly, believe that sometimes the bullies don't know they're the bullies. So when I do this presentation all around the country and the world and I say it, I actually had someone from the state of Maine reach out to me privately, and she's like, I'm actually the bully and I have never known this. And I'm just like, well, this should be your aha moment for you. And it's like, and I bring it back, and my mom hates it when I tell this story, but like, I bring it back to a time that I bullied, and like, I'm the liaison for bullying. And here I am. We were in a complicated case. We had multiple surgeons, multiple residents. And I know that the flow is the resident stays in the room and brings you to PACU. And then he's interrupting me when I'm trying to help another surgeon. And he's like, I'm going to write my number on the board so that you can call me when you're ready to roll into PACU. And, you know, knowing that's not a process, but I just looked at him in front of everyone. And I was like, last time I checked, I wasn't your secretary. And it's like, I was like, ooh, that's like so obnoxious in so many ways. That is like so obnoxious. Like saying secretary is obnoxious, like everything about it. And like, then I was like, you know, and I apologized. I apologized to everyone in the room. Like, I recognized it right away. But, like, would I have if I wasn't, like, obsessed with bullying? If someone hadn't bullied me, like, I had never felt that before, so I would have never known, right? Because you're saying you're being groomed. And then, so you're just doing the groomed behavior. But I also think it's deep-rooted insecurity.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think it is that insecurity. I also think what's important, and you highlighted there, is that you had guilt from that intimidation. You had remorse for what you did. You'll find that the true bullies, they're not showing that remorse, and they're doing this day in and day out. So, you know, we all have our difficulties, and we can have our moments where maybe we had a bullying moment, but it's when it becomes this repetitive day in, day out, where it's affecting the lives and the people around you, that it becomes a really important issue to address.
Do you also think that maybe trying to get into that mindset of the bully maybe a little bit, because we are taught from the beginning, have a thick skin, do all these things, and we're treated like we are. And so then we have these defense mechanisms that come into play to protect ourselves, that they don't realize they're the bully, but they're just, to some extent, they are just living out what they've been taught throughout their career in the OR and then passing it on, because that's what we've always done. And we haven't done the things we should do to educate on this behavior. Is that right?
And I'll tell you right now, Melanie, hazing is a thing of the past in my world. I always say it's 2023, and we're extremely lucky for this new generation who's coming on, and they're not tolerating it. They're saying, you're going to respect me, and I'm going to respect you. And I'm very excited about the new generation. I feel like this is work I've been doing for 20 years, so to say, like working on just culture and bullying and workplace culture and wanting to fit in, you know, sense of belonging. And it's just the new generation is the generation that's making it happen. Because I feel like if you don't have leadership, upper management that is doing anything about it, we're just going to just be in circles, and like people are just going to be stirring the pot, and people are going to leave, and it's going to be awful. And
I do think we're also bringing up a generation of kids that are aware of bullying. So it starts from that ground, the young age where they're learning what a bully is. They're having bully education in schools. My kids hear that term quite a bit, and they are prepared to identify it. Whereas that was something we never went over when we were kids. We never learned that. We never learned to identify it. It took me years, almost 20 years, to really identify how much that bullying had affected me. I had never been taught that. So I think it's great the next generation is coming up, knowing about it and learning about it.
And then us older nurses, we don't want to normalize it anymore. Like, I'm 40. I won't tell you how old Sarah Griffin is.
Well, I got you beat. But I will say this, fraternities are, that's where you most commonly hear the hazing sort of, getting associated, and they're getting into legal trouble, getting kicked off campuses, and yet here in a professional setting, we've sort of condoned it, to your point. And so, I think people need to make that association. I'll also say, I think there's something, I've always felt like nursing is a closed community. And so those closed communities tend to allow for this kind of behavior to kind of stick for a while because they're protecting their community in a way. And I grew up, and I'm from the great state of Maine, and I promise you we're not all bullies. But when I was thinking about what you said just now and how it related to my thoughts about the closed community, I remember feeling that way as a Mainer. I've had people move to the state and they didn't feel necessarily like they were welcomed, like they were from the state of Maine. And those closed communities do kind of set that up. That was kind of more my social experience. And I do love the state, don't get me wrong. But that's definitely, I think, a contributing factor. So we've talked about what it's like to be the bully. We've talked about some of those factors and maybe, what's going on, behind the scenes, but you're trying to eliminate this culture. And what that really requires is self-advocacy. People need to be able to speak up for themselves. They need to know how to do it professionally. Sometimes when we're being bullied, we don't even know, and we retaliate in sort of a modeled behavior of the bully. And we counter sort of with another unhealthy behavior. And I really want to focus on constructive ways to combat this, not necessarily from a leadership position, but from somebody who's being bullied. How do you communicate? I always feel like people say, talk to the person you have a problem with first. But everybody who's experienced gaslighting is going to say, I tried that, and then they turned it around on me and I got nowhere. So there's communicating with the bully themselves, and then knowing when you need to take the next step up and how to communicate that. Can you walk us through that and give us some real practical application?
Sure. I think I can start because I teach Periop 101, and I always am building that rapport from day one. I'm always like, I'm going to be many roles to your mother, your father, your mentor, your nurse, your educator, anything that you need me to be. So I'm building this rapport because I want to have trust, because I want them to come to me in these situations and use me as a sounding board. And say they've gone to the bully and they've done the talking, and I'm more than happy to do the talking as well for them. But I teach them from day one the chain of command. So go to your educator, go to your charge nurse, come to your manager. But there's also retaliation is a real thing. We've all experienced it. One of my periops experienced it so bad it gave me PTSD as well. What her retaliation, what she went through, but. There's hotlines at Boston Children's. We have ombuds who you can call and run these things too. And the senior VP of our surgery, Patty Hickey, we are so lucky in that she is obsessed with workplace culture and healthy work environment. And so I always want to tell people to take it up the chain, call the hotline that we have.
I think it's important that we have the conversation in the operating room. It's not just something that happens. It's something we talk about. It's something where we have some education about it, that we set expectations. And it's important that we also have policy that relates to bullying, and people are aware of that policy and how it can be used. And again, Andrea said that trust. It's important to have that trust among each other and among leadership.
So then the staff have their avenues where they can handle bullying, go up the chain of command. But what if you're the leader? What if you are the person in charge and you have bullying going on in your department, or things that are happening how do you address that? Or how do you address it when an employee comes to you and says, this is happening? I mean, I guess there's a what should you do and what should you not do?
I mean, there are times where it's a hard stop, right? Where you immediately have to take it to HR. For us, there's also a conversation that's had with each other to say, can you trust your leadership that I'm going to do the right thing for you? It may not be at this moment. It may take some time, but trust me, when I'm here for you, I'm going to make this better for you. But also giving them tools to have discussions. So for us, that's putting them in classes. We have these crucial conversations classes and giving them the tools that they need to have conversations and be able to give each other feedback.
I think that in the leadership role, like I was such an expert at being a staff nurse and dealing with this that it was so easy for me. My upbringing, Justin, I'm also a fellow maniac. So,
all right.
But that was so easy. And then when we flipped the switch and then I became the leader, it was like almost like terrifying. I remember the first time I ever dealt with it and like when no one was listening to me, how I had to keep going up the chain of the ladder, but it felt so much harder. And I kept saying to my mother, I'm like, why is this so much harder? Like, I feel like I had so much more to lose in the leadership role for advocating. Like as a staff nurse, I felt way more protected. I don't know why, but then in leadership, I'm like, I'm it. And if people don't believe me or they don't like what I'm saying or they're not on board, then I could be fired. Like, it was terrifying. But at the end of the day, it was my colleagues and my mother who said, you have to practice what you preach. And I was like, you're right. And I'm like, and this is so hard. And it's like, every day can be a struggle with this. And I just want to encourage people like perseverance and doing the right thing. And people will take you seriously if you are confident with what you're saying. If you recognize being gaslighted, like I've said this to people before, I'm like, you're gaslighting me. Like, let me explain to you what that is to me. And like, it's all about perception. And like, I've also had my friends in real life be like, this is so easy for you. Not everyone is as confident as you. I'm like, but when there's patient safety on the line, I need you to be this confident, or you maybe don't belong in the operating room or as a nurse if you can't advocate.
So I know that we're coming down to the end of this interview and time goes by really fast when you're having a good conversation, but y'all have a healthy work environment committee at your facility. We were talking about this before when we talked before this interview, but can you kind of tell me what that is? Because I'm kind of jealous and really interested in what you've got going on.
Like, we are so lucky to be at Boston Children's. I'll let Sarah Griffin talk about that, but I will talk about getting the research grant that the nurse scientist Trish Dwyer and I just got. We just got a grant, and the grant is all for nurse retention and sense of belonging, and we are so excited about that. And
wow.
This was funded by Boston Children's. Like, they want to put the money, the time, and the effort in because we realize how serious this is. Like, I've never felt more psychologically safe in my life, in my career, as before I came here.
Yeah. So the healthy work environment, obviously, this is like a cornerstone to nursing retention and engagement and job satisfaction. So Dr. Patty Hickey has put some amazing resources into a program, our healthy work environment program. So what they do is they take a survey once a year, and we use the framework, the healthy work environment framework. And it's 6 different categories, and they are surveyed on the 6 different categories, and they score the work environment and let us know what's happening. And after they do that survey, we bring it to the leadership group, and they have 3 ambassadors that come from the operating room, from each department. And these 3 ambassadors will get together every other week, and they'll discuss where the gaps are and start to talk about how we can bridge the gap to make this environment a healthier environment. From there, they bring it back to leadership, and we're tasked with providing resources or helping them implement whatever intervention they've come up with. Or we send it back to them and say, you know what, this one may not be the best fit. Let's try again. And we go back and forth with them. And it's almost like a neutral party in between that helps them come up with solutions and ideas to bring back to the group. And we've had some really great success. Our healthy work environment scores in 1 year skyrocketed just by putting some time and investing into the staff and their concerns.
What we're saying is we hear you.
Yeah, that's huge to know that not only, yes, okay, the sounds I'm making are falling on your ears, but actually you're actually hearing them and you're putting it into action and doing something with what I'm saying. That is very validating and empowering to your staff to know that they're actually heard, not just, saying things that are just falling on deaf ears.
They meet with a group of nurse scientists. So it's like really a brilliant process, and it's really cool. Really well.
Andrea and Sarah, great job in this interview today. And I do think, as we talked about at the very beginning, this is one that it just needs to keep coming back up. I think there are always little nuances to telling the stories that illuminate maybe examples of bullying that we might have otherwise not recognized or ignored. Everybody's got different strategies. You have something that we didn't talk about on the very first episode, which is that healthy work environment committee and some things that you've done operationally there at Boston Children's that I think can really be an example for success. I know you're both on LinkedIn. I want to kind of encourage people, if they're in a work setting that doesn't have that kind of commitment or that committee that's set up, but they know that it's desired, maybe they could reach out to you directly and just talk about how you got that off the ground, how you formed the committee, some key elements of making that committee successful. Is that something we could kind of put out there to everybody?
Absolutely. And we're trying to get Megan Nolan and Sarah Griffin to publish it in Outpatient Surgery, like an opinion piece about the work.
Yeah, I'd love to help anyone who's interested. Like I said, I moved into this position because bullying should not be tolerated. It shouldn't be something that pushes nurses out of the field. We need every nurse we can right now, and making a healthy work environment is just a small piece of that, and I'm happy to help anyone.
Really important discussion, though. Thank you both. That was Andrea Dyer, training manager, and Sarah Griffin, perioperative clinical coordinator, both for the satellite operating rooms at Boston Children's Hospital. And Melanie, we have had a discussion previously, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the interview, on this topic, but I really think the more we tell the stories, the more we start to see the nuance and sort of less than obvious examples of bullying, like the gaslighting and the microaggressions, and even to some extent understanding the psychology of a bully. And I love the fact that Andrea pointed out that she had done this presentation and somebody had all of a sudden realized, wait, I'm the bully, because some of that grooming and that normalization of the behavior really does, I think, lend itself to people not being aware that that might be happening, that they, in fact, believe that they are part of what makes that culture successful. And so it's going to take a lot of educating to tackle this issue.
It really is. And it's not a situation that we developed overnight. So it's not one that we're going to fix overnight either, but continued conversations will help. I also think that it's crucial to give people the resources and the information that they can understand how to deal with it. Where do I go? Who do I talk to? What do I say if I'm the person experiencing it, or if I'm the leader and have this in my department? How can I make it better? So having these conversations, how we can communicate, how we can improve, are all vital to changing the culture in our OR and making it a great place to work.
All right. Well, you can connect with Andrea and Sarah on LinkedIn, like we said at the end of the interview. If you do not have a healthy work environment committee at your facility, you might want to learn more about what that would look like. Certainly do that. Follow First Case as well if you're there on LinkedIn and Facebook. And we would love it if you shared this episode out, the post for it, maybe with some comments if you learned something, or maybe you've got a story to share of your own experience, either observing experiencing bullying or maybe some other additional ways to deal with that and communicate, definitely comment in the comment sections for the post for this episode. We'd love to hear from you. Download the smartphone app for iPhone and Android as well. Simply search for First Case Media in the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. And finally, if you do want to give some feedback to us, but more privately, we do have an email. It's info@firstcasemedia.com, or you can message Melanie or myself directly on LinkedIn. We would love to hear from you. And on behalf of Melanie and myself, thanks for listening to this week's episode of First Case.